In today's episode, I sit down with Justin Nassiri, the founder of Executive Presence, a company that specializes in helping founders and leaders strengthen their personal brands. Justin's work answers a timely question for me. How and why should entrepreneurs effectively build and maintain a personal brand online, especially with so much noise out there in the world? Our conversation explores why some of the loudest voices on platforms like LinkedIn aren't always the most informed, surprise, surprise, and how paradoxically it's often the most thoughtful, mission-driven leaders who hesitate to share their stories. In this episode, Justin talks about how entrepreneurs can open up online and project themselves authentically while also managing the many demands of running a company. He also explains why some of the best voices, often the ones least interested in self-promotion, are precisely the ones the world needs to hear. If you're wondering if personal branding is worth your time or how to approach it without compromising your values, this episode is a great listen. Let's jump into my conversation with Justin Nassiri. Hey, Justin, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the work you do. I feel like the world is a better place when more people are thinking about building in a more conscious, present, preservable, sustainable way.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I was excited to talk with you is you're like right in the middle of a very interesting topic these days, which is personal brand. And I feel like I can't, walk down the street in Boulder where I live without seeing someone who's like on their phone, recording some video for LinkedIn or doing something to, enhance their personal brand. And your company, Executive Presence, I know helps founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, leaders to enhance their online profiles, specifically around brand. And I just wanted to start with a conversation about that because there's so much activity in this area right now. So many entrepreneurs are jumping in to say, yes, I want to plant the flag. I want to establish myself as the leading voice on such and such a topic, and are spending a lot of time and energy on it. In what way is this like a need to do right now? So do we all need to be doing this? Is it only some? How do you think about the need for an entrepreneur to establish a personal brand as it relates to all the things that they're doing, building their company? And by the way, which is obviously in competition with the many, many other demands on their time.
Yeah. We don't all need to do it, but I would say that the people listening who are least interested in doing it, the world probably needs to hear from them the most. I think that my inspiration for starting Executive Presence came from a very judgy place of, on LinkedIn, seeing the loudest voices not being the most informed voices or the people with the deepest expertise. It was the people who either had the most time or were driven by the desire for recognition. And I don't think that either of those lead to the best advice to follow. And I think on a personal level, although I'm somewhat disengaged from pop culture, when I see like a Real Housewives or a Kim Kardashian type setup, I kind of mourn as a parent with two young kids of like, these aren't the role models I want my kids learning from. Like I would love for there to be an equivalent show with lots less drama, but with a really healthy marriage or really healthy parenting. But I feel like those people who have maybe the healthier life or maybe a little bit more grounded view of themselves either feel unqualified to share what they know or uninterested because it's a discomfort. Mm-hmm. And what I have learned from most of the CEOs that I work with, one of the through lines is probably 90% of the 200 CEOs I've worked with. They say something to the effect of like, I really dislike social media and I do not want the spotlight, but I am doing this because it helps my company, or I'm doing this because I believe in this so much I need to get the message out there. And so, particularly when someone has a company less than 20 employees, I would say, look, I'm in that stage. It's kind of survival mode. You're kind of doing everything you can to keep the company running. And by and large, I'd say, I don't think that this needs to be in your top 3 at that stage. There's probably lower hanging fruit to address that will benefit your company. But as a company grows, if you know that your message or your company would benefit from more trust and authority and awareness, using your personal brand is an incredible way to shine that spotlight on the cause or the company that you believe in. And know that if you're doing it for the right reasons, it will probably make you uncomfortable, because it does feel uncomfortable to be the person sharing your knowledge. And so I just like to say that because, again, the people who are least likely to do this are probably the ones with the best advice and the most pure intentions for sharing it, rather than, and I get triggered seeing these people walking down the street filming their video talking. It's like, dude, if it's something important to say, to sit down and record a video, you got to, you're so busy, you got to walk down the street and record your message. It just doesn't feel right. But I think that there's a lot more people who, if they contributed their voice to the conversation, we'd all be better off, because they have a powerful voice and a powerful perspective, and their example is what we need, rather than the stereotype of the person who's jonesing for the dopamine hit of someone liking what they have to say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing up the part about discomfort, and I'll share. I have a lot of discomfort about so in my life, in my career, especially for the last three years, I've had sort of two parts, right? So I've had the business Alex that's building a company. First it was Capta, and now it's Amplify, and then I've got the conscious entrepreneur Alex who's doing that, and I found myself reluctant to talk about the conscious entrepreneur side of things, like the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, and the highs and the lows, and all the things that you have to do there. And I would feel uncomfortable with revealing, like, yeah, sure, I'm a CEO, and there's days when it just sucks, for example, or like, here's all the challenges. And so I found myself pulling back, like not really doing that. And then, just to continue with this example, I would go on stage and talk at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, and everyone's like, "Oh, we want to hear more from you. Like, that was so interesting. Like, you're so real and open and vulnerable, and what have you." And I've always sort of struggled to put those together. And I'm saying this assuming that I'm not alone in any shape. How do you work with people who are like, "Hey, I've got this is my passion, but this is my job, and I don't want the two to mix, or anything like that."
I'll start with two thoughts. One simple and one more of a story. But the first one is, I just think that authenticity sells, and I think that when I work with a CEO, oftentimes they're like, "Who do I need to be? Like, I'm all of these things, but who do I need to be online?" And my kind of biased reaction is like, we need to present you in the highest fidelity possible online, because there is just something about you that is attracting investors or employees or customers or whatever else. So it's not about sharing the right part of you. It's more about just being as authentic as possible. And that's one reason I'm a big fan of the build in public. And I think that, even what you just said, let's just say within LinkedIn, could be a great post of like, man, I run two different companies and I feel like I'm leading two different lives. Like, that would resonate with a lot of people. And that kind of leads into the second one, which is, I really, I do a lot of men's work, and I really love working with other men and being vulnerable with other men. And in half a decade of doing this, I have seen this in 9 or 10 different groups and settings where, you're in a group with men, and there is someone who takes a risk in vulnerability. And when I do this, it feels like you're on the edge of a cliff about to jump into the water. And you almost can see that on the person's face, where they are really opening up in a way that it takes, in my view, a lot of courage. And they're usually sharing something that they think is singular to them, that there is a struggle in their marriage or parenting or work or life or purpose. And what I have observed is that when that one person has the courage to be vulnerable, almost all the heads around the room nod, like, "Oh yeah, I know that too." It's almost like this person, in having the courage to voice something, has put a name on something everyone else is feeling, but now it's out there. So it's almost like a sense of relief. And then that person sharing realizes they're not alone, and it creates connection. And I think it's a little bit dramatic, but I think that that happens in any form of thought leadership, whether it's a podcast or on a stage or in a LinkedIn post. When you have the courage to be real about what's going on, I think that we fear that we will be judged and ostracized for it. But every time, without exception, I see people move towards that and want to be closer, and they trust that person more, and they want to get to know that person more. And so that's why, and I know there's a lot of different takes to a personal brand, but I think that being authentic and being willing to be vulnerable in a healthy way, right? I see unhealthy examples where someone's like, I just got dumped by my girlfriend of 5 years. I'm like, maybe talk about that with your therapist and not everyone on LinkedIn. Maybe process this a little bit, right? But if you've kind of processed something and it's something that feels real to you, I think that people move towards that. And so that's what I like of like what you had said is you don't actually have to figure out what to talk about online. Like that's part of the journey is like, hey, new here. I got these two things. It feels in conflict, and then see how that lands, see what people see. And then you kind of go where the conversation takes you, just like a podcast or a dinner table. It's not, you don't have to have the speech prepared. It's more of like sharing what's in progress and then going where there's interest.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, just so that we can all hone in on this and agree on the definition here, when we're talking about personal brand, what do we mean?
I theoretically run a company that does personal branding, and I hate the term personal brand because every time someone talks about it, it's like, I don't want to be anything like you. Like, I don't want to have a personal brand, right? I think some words that might be more accessible as reputation or maybe executive branding, right? Like your professional brand. I like reputation because whether we invest in it or not, we all have a reputation, right? Like if I threw up an image of Steve Jobs, we automatically have words that we associate with that. Probably innovation or visionary or disruptor. Like he has a reputation, and there could be actions he could have taken to craft that or to communicate that. But whether he takes action or not, he's going to have a reputation. And so when I think about personal branding, I think of it more about like trying to be intentional in how you present yourself to the world so that the reputation is one that is in line with who you are. And the more actions we take, the more it reinforces that reputation. And I like that view of it because I don't think that you can in the long term build a personal brand or reputation or executive brand that is in conflict to who you are. I think eventually the truth gets out, right? If you're presenting yourself as someone who's compassionate, eventually someone's going to get the video of you in a restaurant being a jerk to a waiter, and you're going to realize like, oh, that was just a farce. And so I think that there's too much accountability now. And I think that people are too good at spotting the forgery online. But I think that if you reveal what's important to you, if you talk about the things that you know and where you're an authority, you actually have experience, or more importantly, you just share your own experience. Like, hey, I made a mistake in my first company with this, really regret it, but here's what I learned. I hope you benefit as well. That's just a way of giving visibility into why you do the things that you do and what you know about and where your expertise is.
Now, there's a bit of a delicate dance here because you're saying that authenticity is the best way to go forward, and we've got to figure out how to, kind of create that executive persona or that create that executive reputation. And at the same time, I mean, I know that a lot of the things that I see on LinkedIn are ghostwritten, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
written by somebody else. This looks like it's coming from such and such a person,
Yep.
and usually it's things like, did you know that this immigrant from Cyprus built a $47 billion company doing this, that, and the other? And you're like, okay, I know a
Yeah.
busy CEO did not sit down on a Tuesday afternoon to
Yep.
write this, right? So there's a little bit of I guess, a question mark there. So this is your day-to-day work. So how do you, talk to people who come to you with a concern that says, can I really be my authentic self if someone else is writing my posts for me and like editing and curating this entire thing? How does that work for you?
I think some of it depends on the process, right? Like how is it written? How is the sausage made? I'll tell you, I'm a big fan, especially when driving or running, of listening to audiobooks. And the thing that kind of keeps my interest is usually autobiographies or something with a strong narrative. And many of these autobiographies, I realize, are not written solely by the topic of the biography. It's co-written, or it's ghostwritten, or in collaboration. And I understand that to be that this person has expertise, they have knowledge, they have something to say, but their expertise is not putting that on a written page. And so they've hired someone to extract their ideas and tell it in a way that's understandable. And that's what we seek to emulate. We're certainly in that technically in the ghostwriting category, but the way that we do it is, and this is something that anyone could replicate on their own, is almost like you're doing right now. It's interviewing the client, and it's asking questions that we know would lead to a good LinkedIn post, but it's their ideas, and we're using the transcript. So it's their words and their phrasing and things like that. But to be honest, we're doing a lot of trimming. We're taking away 80% of it because people are not succinct. People are not direct. People kind of say the same thing multiple times. And then there's also specific ways of writing on LinkedIn that spoon feed the audience and make it easier for people to consume. And so we're kind of packaging it in a way that we know will have a bigger impact. But for me, it's not, I think that the other extreme would be, some people would view ghostwriting as like, hey, I want to be an authority on AI, so write some stuff on AI. Well, it's like, well, that isn't authentic, because I'm going to go off and research and write something that is my own research, my own thoughts, my own voice, my own words. It's using nothing of that. So I think the authenticity comes from making sure that it is your idea, your takeaway, your words, the way that you like to speak. I think that LinkedIn rewards a conversational voice, which is why we like that interview format. But even in this conversation, right, like for me or for you, we could likely take the transcript of this, and we could clean up the transcript and turn it in with some work, but a lot less work than writing from scratch. Turn it into probably 20 different LinkedIn posts that would do well. And I think that this format for me is way easier to uncover insights than me with a pen and paper, which I just get writer's block. But you put me on
Yeah.
the phone with someone cool like you that's curious, and like we have a conversation, and like oftentimes I will come to insights that I didn't even know I had. So that's kind of my thought of like, you don't have to do it alone for something to be authentic, right? If I train
Mm.
for a marathon and I have a coach, that doesn't take away from me running the marathon. And in some ways, it means that I value the marathon more because I'm willing to have someone prepare me and make me do my best.
Yeah, I appreciate that reframe actually, and it's helpful to think about that, because my first instinct sometimes when I see these things is like, this is so obviously not written by this person. Like, why should I
Yeah.
care, right? And there
Yep.
are some where you're just like, this is just it's obviously just been through the mill somewhere, and like they'd
Yep.
spat something out. But what you're talking about is a discovery process of who is this person, what do they care about, what are their critical insights, what's their special voice, and you're helping to extract that and then refine the message. But I want to get into another thing here. It's funny. I didn't expect us to be like super tactical on this podcast,
Yeah.
but I have a ton of questions, mainly selfishly because of stuff that I'm doing in my life right now.
Yeah.
So you just said, and a lot of the people who listen to this also do, or also have a need for creating a lot of content, right? To get out there on LinkedIn and whatnot. You just said that you could take a transcript from this conversation, for example, and create 20 posts off of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, if I could do that for everyone, that would be amazing, because I would never have to write again. They would just kind of automatically get created. But what are the special angles that we're looking for? How do we do this? How do we not just repeat ourselves over and over? How do we create hooks so that people actually care about this stuff? Like, what are the secret ingredients there?
So I think the biggest one is kind of reframing what you just said, which is you don't want to repeat yourself. And I think that one thing that we all know about great leaders is a great leader says the same thing a million different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I'm trying to be better at, is the consistency of, in my mind, I think if I tell my team our goal for a quarter once, that is tattooed on their brain.
Right.
And the truth is that for it to get across, every Monday meeting, I tell everyone our goal again. It's like the whatever you think you have to say, multiply it by 100 and then 100 again, and that's what you have to say. And so what I think, and I think that this is one of the powers of a platform with like LinkedIn is you can it's like stand-up comedy. You can very quickly get feedback about what works. So I'll give you an example. I used to, because like I'm very passionate about the men's group work. I used to talk about that on LinkedIn, crickets every time. And so I had to be honest with myself and say, look, this is very important to me and authentic to who I am. But people on LinkedIn don't value what I have to say on it. So I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to push a rock up a hill. I'm not going to try to talk about something that no one values my advice on. But I found that when I shared leadership lessons from the military, or when I talked about, running and the ideas I'd have for business, or when I shared mistakes that I made, that did really well. And so I wanted to be the heat seeking missile of saying, okay, this is a message that lurks or a story that works. But if we're being honest, any story can be told a million different ways, right? Or any insight can be harped on any, million different ways. And someone that, listeners might be familiar with, Justin Welsh, I feel like is kind of one of the godfathers of LinkedIn. He's kind of pioneered this thought of approaching LinkedIn as a game almost that can be game, like a system. I think if you watch his posts, he's saying the same thing every day. It's basically, if you work for someone else, you're a sucker. You can make money working for yourself. That's the core of every message. But he's great at finding new ways to say that. And the message doesn't change, but he's telling it in different ways. And so I think that the biggest thing for, content creation is it's okay to be redundant as long as you're telling it in interesting ways. Like if you're copying and pasting the same message, clearly not. But if you're taking the nugget of an idea and finding different ways to explain that or show that, you could do it in a list, you could do it in a story, you could do it in an anecdote. Like there's lots of different formats to use. And so that's what I would say is that like even a podcast like this, you can kind of repurpose and say, okay, what were the major themes here? We can turn it into post, but then like, what ideas does that spur, right? Like, okay, reading this line that it got. And one of the great things about LinkedIn too is the comments, right? I had a post on a few days ago that was bashing the PR industry. It had like 150 comments, and it gave me all sorts of ideas for other posts of people saying like, well, you're wrong on this. And you're like, oh, you're absolutely right. I'm wrong on that. Great. Let me write about that. Oh, this happened. Okay. Like you kind of use the comments to realize like, oh, there's more nuance to add here, or a different direction, or more precise, or expanding on an idea.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, for me, the challenge is simply, I do a lot of, podcasts and webinars, and we do courses at Amplify. And I feel like I'm constantly looking at this little camera and talking into this microphone. And it's like, I just want to take all this stuff and have it create its own engine there for me.
I literally did that. I'm just experimenting with this, but I'm like, still do sales and marketing for our team, and had a sales call today and realized afterwards that I said some things that I say often, and they asked some questions that I hear often. And so I threw the transcript into ChatGPT and I said, okay, pull out for me what are questions they had. I'll turn those into posts. And then what are some things that I said, and I can turn those into posts. And so when I hear what you're saying, Alex, I think, man, if you've got that much content, you will never need to sit and write down. What you'll need to do is become a content harvester of kind of paying attention, maybe even taking notes during it of like, oh man, I said that, and that was a great point. Or this person said this and it made me think this. And then you kind of extract the text and view it as like, from the webinar or the podcast transcript, maybe you get 50% of a post. Great. Maybe you get 80% and you're just kind of fine tuning it. But it's so much easier to start there than to start from scratch.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found, I just had my interview with our team today for my LinkedIn posts. They always start with like, hey, what's on your mind? And there was so much on my mind. Like, man, I had this sales call, or I talked to an employee and they said this, or over the weekend I thought this. It's kind of just bookmarking for ourselves these things that we think about but never give ourselves room to explore. Each of those ideas could be several posts.
That's very cool. Now, Justin, you've been in the storytelling space for a while, I guess we could say. So right now you're founder of Executive Presence. You've done Captivate AI. You've done Storybox. these were successful companies with exits. Tell us about the through line here for you. Why do you keep, first of all, why do you keep doing this? It's hard enough
Yeah.
to do it one company
Yeah.
once. But what's the through line motivation for you?
I'll amend one thing. My first company raised 3 million and was not a great exit. And
Okay.
Captivate led to executive presence, but sold it off because I realized it was a bigger thing. And neither of them were the successes I wanted. And honestly, between Storybox and executive presence, it felt, or during those times, it felt like pretty much a decade of wandering in the wilderness and questioning, should I be doing this? Should I be doing something else? Like, what's wrong with me? What's going right? What's going wrong? And I'm very grateful for executive presence because it vindicates the path for me getting here. But there was so much time along the way of just being like, what am I doing? Should I be doing something else? And not really knowing what was right. And it's another example of, like, clearly I'm projecting online these things, and they, in truth, they were acquired, but it's not what you think. And I think that that's more stories than we expect. More people are projecting strength over insecurity. Um, I think what motivates me right now is two things, and I imagine this will change over time. But the first one, I have two small kids, and I really want to set an example of standing in my power, achieving something great, showing them that I'm just pushing myself. Like, I'm getting what I'm worth. And I think that comes from, like, a lot of examples I had growing up were people who were too shy, in my view, to kind of like command what they were worth in the marketplace, or didn't want to rock the boat, or didn't want conflict, or didn't want to push. And so I want to kind of correct that for my offspring of showing, like, look, I'm going to really push myself to do my absolute best and show you an example of someone who's really going after, like, stretching themselves and embracing discomfort and growing. And I think that's, like, a big motivator right now. I think the other one, and one that I was so happy to hear about your show, is, like, I just think that a lot of businesses are not well run in terms of, like, they might be great businesses, but they are not great places to work. And I think it's possible to create a work environment that leaves people better off and challenges them inside and outside of the work to be their best, and treats them humanely and invests in them and sees them as whole people and allows them to bring their full self to work. And, like, I kind of reached this conclusion in my first company that it's like, look, if I, have the football right now, if I have my moment and all I do is make life better for 20 people, that's a great purpose, right? This is a lot of time my employees spend with me working. If that's 8 hours that make them feel better and provides for their families and gives them a sense of a mission, what better impact could I have on the world than helping out a dozen or so people around me? And that gives me a lot of motivation in terms of the culture and growing the company and hiring more people. Is that I think I can be a better boss than a lot of these people who exploit their workers, or don't treat them as human beings, or don't realize that, like, look, one of our employees' grandmother just died. Like, that's what matters. We'll figure it out. We'll cover for you. But, like, do what you need right there, right? Like,
Mm.
we're doing advertising. Like, I take it very seriously, but it's not more serious than, like, a family member dying. And I feel like, if more people had that work environment, they'd probably be happier and better family members and better community members. And, like, that's one of my motivations right now.
Yeah, that's I like I like the way you frame. Thank you for framing the
Yep.
last that kind of interim period as the wilderness, because a lot of
Yeah.
people feel that way, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs will wake up every day and say, "Why am I doing this again? Like, what's the point? And how do I keep going?" And it can really be a gigantic wall of frustration. One of the ways that I saw it described recently was it. And this was true for me, was the difference between a sunk cost and an opportunity cost. So the
Yeah.
sunk cost was like
Love that.
me in the past, like dragging something along I didn't want to do. The opportunity cost was me sitting there saying, "Hey, I've got a certain amount of life and energy left in me. What do I want to be doing?" And making sure I'm focusing on that. Now, Justin, you mentioned that you are really into doing men's work. I've done some of that
Yep.
before as well. Been in a group. I was in a group for about a year and a half, and got a lot of value out of it. What are the other things that you do as part of your personal practice?
Yeah, I'll tell it kind of historically. And my first company, the first time it almost went bankrupt, I was stressed out of my mind, and my at the time girlfriend, now wife, encouraged me to see a therapist, and that was kind of like the very first thing that I do. And I've worked with a therapist since then. I feel like it's the best investment I can make in my professional and personal life. So started
Nice.
with therapy. That therapist got me into Vipassana meditation and week
Mm.
long meditation retreats, which I think are very, very great for everyone. And from there, I got into something called nonviolent communication, which is a horrible branding for something that's very powerful. It's just empathetic communication. And I met people there, and that got me into men's groups work. And I did that with someone called John Wineland for several years. Is a great teacher, and did offshoots of Tony Robbins and lots of other retreats of just kind of like picking up little skills along the way. And but I'd say right now, like the men's group work is kind of like the one consistent. That's something I do weekly. I have a meditation practice, which is important to me, and therapy has been huge. I also see a trauma therapist, EMDR. I feel like all of us have trauma, and like just kind of specifically working on that is really valuable. And I just view all of these things as like, I mean, they're all luxuries, right? Like I'm not being shot at on a daily basis. My life is not being threatened. I'm investing in the higher level of Maslow's hierarchy. Like I think it's a gift. But I think that the need that all of these things are fulfilling are connection with others and with myself. I think a sense of belonging. I think a sense of perspective, oftentimes bringing issues to the group and getting a lot of valuable third party insights on that. And a sense of support and supporting. I think it like just hits on a lot of needs that I think a lot of us have and are not necessarily met. And I think that there's ways likely to meet those in a church environment or in a community group or things like that. But I've just found that in the personal growth area, it's just really connected in terms of like we're all trying to be better human beings, and almost having a space to process the mistakes we make and who we're trying to become.
I'm gonna plus one on Vipassana. So, whew, the hardest thing I've ever done probably is a 10-day silent meditation. I did it. It's the
Yeah.
one in North Fork, California, a few years ago. And I don't know if you've been to that space. I'm gonna plus one nonviolent communication. I mean, my goodness, Marshall Rosenberg was such a gift to the universe. And for anyone listening, for me, the best way to consume his work was to listen to the Sounds True audiobook where he's
Mm.
talking, and he's not even reading the book. He's just it's just like this lecture series that they compiled into this audiobook, and it's amazing. And I think there's so much to learn from nonviolent communication, the way that we express our needs, identify our needs, express our needs, see our needs as a gift to others, stuff like that. So absolutely,
I would add that it's
100%.
probably the best sales, customer service, and leadership investment you could make as well, because it's listening, replaying back what you heard. Like when my team does that, and I try to do that on calls, it works so well. Like even something as simple as like, hey, let me just play this back here. What I heard you say was, and the person feels heard and they relax more, and it builds trust and slows things down. Yeah, it's not just even a personal benefit, though. It's a huge relational benefit. Like nonviolent communication, I think, has massive business applications.
Now, to what extent are you a different Justin now
Mm.
than you were when you did company number one? Like, how have you
Oh,
changed and evolved?
I mean, on a cellular level, right? I'm a different human being several times over, probably. I think one way is in my first company, I kind of maybe out of a sense of neediness, really fixated on everyone's happiness. And actually, I had a coach, I work with a coach now, and she had said today, like, you're responsible for the employees' happiness in the office, but not outside of the office. And I think I blurred that in the first company. And so when there were people who were not a good fit, I tried to force it. And in this company, I've had to let several people go. And I think that the difference was like the moment I realized they weren't a good fit, I moved towards it immediately. It may have taken me months and months and months to get there, but literally the point of like realizing on Wednesday and having that tough conversation on a Friday and realizing that that's not only Is it not abusive? It's actually, if I'm really caring for this person, having them in a position that doesn't benefit them is not good for me, the company, the other team members, for them. And so I think it's like a higher level of compassion is one big way. Um, I think a second way is like, and this might be more age than the work that I've done, is just trusting my intuition more and honoring that, and just kind of like, okay, something's not right here, and kind of making the space to see what that is. I think self-care, like the first company I worked like 80, 90 hours a week. And not to say that there's something wrong with that, but I was not eating healthy. I was not caring for myself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in any way. And I think that took me years to recover from. And I think that with this company, it's very, very sustainable life of just, I'm wanting to make sure I take care of myself as much as possible. Yeah, I think those are some of the ways in which I'm different.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this. And for
You.
me, the takeaway is all these businesses are opportunities for growth, right? And so sometimes they smack us in the face, sometimes they don't, but they're all opportunities for us to grow and evolve as humans. You found some tools that really work for yourself. You've been able to find inner motivation to continue to build and to take back your power, but you've built a support structure around you that allows you to do that, to keep you fully resourced. And so, I just want to appreciate you for doing that and for being willing to talk about it. And I want to remind everyone who's listening that yes, even when things feel tough, or even when you're questioning yourself, you can find resources out there. You can find ways to reframe the challenges, to stay motivated, to get out there and get stuff done. Don't overlook it. Don't sacrifice yourself as you're building your business. So Justin Nassiri, thanks so much for joining us here today. And I promise there are going to be lots of LinkedIn posts coming out of this conversation.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.
Thanks.